Imagine becoming one of the most recognizable faces of an entire musical subculture. The hair and makeup and gloomy romance, black clothes, the general feeling of looking like you were personally betrayed by sunlight, and millions of fans connect you with that world. Journalists call you a goth icon. Publicists try to call you the goth father. The internet looks at you and says, well, obviously. And your response is basically, well, absolutely not. Please stop. That is the strange reality of Robert Smith. He is the iconic frontman of The Cure, one of the most beloved outsider bands in rock history. But if you call The Cure a goth band, Smith does not gently nod and accept his throne in the castle of decorative sadness. He rejects it hard. He has said The Cure was never really a goth band at all, which is a little like inventing a haunted mansion, filling it with fog machines, inviting everyone inside, and then saying, well, actually, guys, this is a breakfast nook now. But that contradiction is exactly what makes The Cure fascinating, because Robert Smith did not set out to become the king of goth. He did not set out to become a rock institution. He didn't even seem especially interested in becoming a career musician. But somehow, by refusing to fit neatly anywhere, The Cure became one of the most successful outsider bands of the last 40 years. So this is the story of Robert Smith, The Cure, and the band that never wanted to fit in. By 2019, The Cure had reached a position that almost should not make sense. They could headline Glastonbury, they could play Hyde Park in front of 65,000 people, and they could be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yet, despite all of that mainstream success, they were still seen as a slightly weird outsider band. And Robert Smith loved that. To him, it was the perfect position. The Cure had somehow become huge without becoming normal. They were famous but not polished, beloved but not corporate, legendary even, but still just strange enough to make award show producers nervous. And in a music world that loves to flatten artists into easy labels, The Cure remained stubbornly difficult to explain. Were they post-punk, goth, pop, alternative? A band for sad teenagers, or a band for romantic adults? A band for people who only own black shirts? The answer naturally is yes and no. The Cure could write songs that sounded like heartbreak echoing through an abandoned cathedral. Then they could turn around and release something playful, strange, and catchy enough to get stuck in your head while you're buying cereal. Robert Smith's whole career has been built on that kind of contradiction. And the more people tried to define him, the more he seemed determined to slip out of the box, possibly while wearing eyeliner. So let's take a look back at Robert Smith's early view of emotion. Growing up as an English boy, Smith said there was pressure to conform. You were encouraged not to show your feelings. The proper emotional range was apparently somewhere between mildly damp cardboard and Victorian chimney. But Smith could not really do that. He felt things, he showed things, and if someone told him not to do something, his natural response was to lean even harder in the opposite direction. That emotional defiance became part of the DNA of The Cure. It is there in Boys Don't Cry, a song that plays with the pressure placed on boys and men to hide sadness, vulnerability, and heartbreak. The title sounds simple, the idea underneath it is not. Smith was not interested in being a singer who pretended not to feel anything. He said you would have to be a pretty boring singer to do that, and boring is one thing Robert Smith has rarely been accused of being. Grumpy, yeah. Mysterious, definitely. Responsible for thousands of teenagers discovering black eyeliner, allegedly. But boring? No, not really. After the band's early Three Imaginary Boys period, Smith wanted to move beyond the original trio sound. He felt he had outgrown that format. He wanted keyboards, atmosphere, he wanted the music to get bigger and stranger. He began drawing from influences like early Pink Floyd, Nick Drake, and Captain Beefheart. So the band added some members and the sound expanded, and The Cure became more atmospheric. They were a lot more textured and cinematic than before, but Smith never fully abandoned the 3-minute pop song. Because without those pop instincts, The Cure could have easily flirted off into the clouds of grand artistic seriousness and never really returned. But Smith himself has said pop singles helped keep the band from becoming pompous in the mid-80s, which is refreshingly honest. A lot of artists accidentally become pompous and never notice. That balance gave them songs like Just Like Heaven. When Smith wrote it, he felt he might never write anything better. He remembered telling the others in the studio that they might as well pack up. Thankfully, they did not. But that's part of his charm. The Cure could be emotionally intense without losing melody, and they could be dark without becoming too one-note. They could sound like the end of the world and still give you a chorus you want to sing in the car. And that's where the goth question gets kind of complicated, because yes, The Cure made dark and atmospheric music. And yes, albums like Pornography helped shape the sound and mood that many people associate with goth. And yes, Robert Smith's look became one of the most recognizable images in alternative music. But Smith has always pushed back against the idea that The Cure are simply a goth band. In his view, the story is a lot messier than that. He has said he was doing Let's Go to Bed when goth was really starting. He points out that The Cure had already moved through different phases before and after their darker period. They did not just stay in that one lane. They made Pornography, and then they made Let's Go to Bed. They made songs that sounded like emotional claps, and then they made The Love Cats. That is not exactly the behavior of a band trying to guard the sacred gates of gloom. Smith also said goths themselves were not always thrilled with The Cure either. Some thought the band had jumped ship when they moved on to those playful pop singles. And that's one of the funniest parts of the whole thing. The general public looks at Robert Smith and says, "Yep, he's the goth king." Robert Smith says no. And then the actual goths, at least at one point, were like, no, he's not. So somehow The Cure became the goth band that Robert Smith says was not goth, while some goths also thought they were not goth enough. Smith does not seem to hate the goth subculture. In fact, he has spoken warmly about subcultures and people who choose alternative ways of living. He said he feels a community of spirit with goths and other outsiders, but he does not consider himself to be a part of it. His argument is simple. The Cure are part of the history, but not the definition. A footnote, maybe, but not the whole book. Though, to be fair, it is a pretty large footnote, and this refusal to be boxed in shows up again and again in Robert Smith's career. Perfect example is The Cure's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. For most artists, getting into the Hall of Fame is kind of the moment where everyone smiles, gives a polite speech, and pretends rock history was one long group hug. Robert Smith had a slightly different experience, though. The Cure had 13 members across their history, but the Hall of Fame planned to induct only 10 of them, and Smith was not happy about that. One of the excluded members was Andy Anderson, the band's former drummer, who was seriously ill at the time and died before the ceremony. Smith wrote to the Hall explaining why he felt the other members should also be included. He believed they were part of the story and had contributed in their own ways. And the answer he got back, well, it did not satisfy him, to say the least. To him, it felt cold and dismissive, and it made him pretty angry. He compared it to being back in school, and honestly, that tracks. Few things seem more designed to annoy Robert Smith than a prestigious institution saying, "because we said so." Up until about 2 weeks before the event, Smith said he was not going to go. He told the others, essentially, let's see who blinks first. This is not normal award show behavior. This is the behavior of a man who has spent decades turning stubbornness into an art form. Eventually, the rest of the band chipped away at him. Simon Gallup, in particular, argued that going would probably mean more to Andy. So Smith came around, and in the end, he was glad that they went. The night became meaningful. The band reconnected with former members, rebuilt bridges, and Smith acknowledged that the induction mattered more to people than he had expected, especially in America. And that's the interesting thing about him. He can be sarcastic and resistant, and he can seem allergic to ceremony. But underneath it all, there is a strong sense of fairness and loyalty. He didn't object because he thought awards were beneath him. He objected because he thought the story was incomplete. And Robert Smith, for all his gloom, does not seem to like incomplete stories. The same attitude explains why The Cure lasted so long. Smith never wanted music to become just a career. He said he never wanted it to be a job. He never bought into the idea that he had to do it. That is a strange thing to hear from someone who became a rock legend. Most musicians spend their whole lives trying to make music their job. And Smith got the job and then spent decades making sure it did not feel like one. He walked away from it from time to time, and the band took longer breaks as they got older. They lived outside the machinery of constant touring and constant product, and that distance made the band feel special when they returned. When The Cure plays concerts, they're long, sometimes around 2.5 hours, and Smith is not just going through the motions either. He wants the performance to matter, because on stage, he tries to get lost in the music. At giant shows, he says he can't really make eye contact with the crowd because he's very short-sighted. A huge audience becomes an amorphous mess, which is a beautiful phrase. It also means that one of the most emotionally intense frontmen in rock history may have spent decades singing to what looks like, from his perspective, haunted soup. Small shows weirdly can be more intimidating for him. When the audience is close enough to touch, there's a different pressure. But at huge shows, he can perform more broadly. He can exaggerate his gestures, and he can become the version of himself that fills the field. But he does not usually talk much on stage. He said that when he is singing and playing, he feels transported. Having to speak interrupts that. He feels like he's communicating through the music. Smith's relationship with the past gets even more complicated when you look at one of The Cure's earliest and most controversial songs. Their first single included 10:15 Saturday Night and another song with a title based on Albert Camus' novel The Stranger. It's a title I'm not going to keep repeating here because YouTube's algorithm hears certain words and immediately starts clutching pearls in a fainting chair. Let's call it the Camus song. The point is, the song was not intended as a hateful anthem, it was based on literature. Smith has explained that it dealt with complex ideas, especially the value of human life and the way people value their own lives and the lives of others. But the title caused controversy for decades. The song was very misunderstood, and it was very misused, and during politically tense moments, especially around conflicts in the Middle East, Smith said DJs would dust it off in ways that clearly frustrated him. He said it made him want to tear his hair out, which, considering the hair involved, would have been a structural emergency. Now, at one point, he even changed the live lyric to "killing another," trying to move the focus away from the original title. But eventually, Smith decided he wanted to reclaim the song, and at The Cure's 40th anniversary Hyde Park show in London, the band closed with it. That choice was not taken casually. The concert took place on July 7th, the anniversary of a tragic London attack, and there had been an anniversary event in Hyde Park that morning. So when Smith put the song in the set list, the rest of the band looked at him like he had lost his mind. Understandably. But Smith explained that the song was not about hatred. It was not about targeting anyone. It was about something more complicated and human, drawn from Camus. He admitted that one of his regrets was the title. If he had called it something else, the controversy might never have happened. But he also refused to pretend the song did not exist. And that is very Robert Smith. He can regret the framing and understand the controversy, but he won't let the worst possible interpretation become the only interpretation. He wanted to turn it back into a song instead of letting it remain just a radioactive title. That's not the safe move, but The Cure were never built around safe moves. They were built around discomfort, beauty, contradiction, melody, sadness, weirdness, and the occasional pop single that sounds like it escaped from a haunted carnival. Smith's worldview also became darker as he got older, and Smith said that since The Cure started, the world had felt like a relentless downward slide. He spoke about inequality and about how hope seemed to have faded after the late 70s. So after more than 40 years and massive concerts, classic songs, rock and roll Hall of Fame recognition, and generations of fans discovering The Cure in bedrooms, record shops, cars, and probably several candlelit basements, what does Robert Smith want his legacy to be? Well, his answer is almost aggressively Robert Smith. He does not really care. He said he has never thought about legacy. As he put it, you do not attend your own funeral, so what does it matter? That is dark, funny, and annoyingly hard to argue with. He also said he does not have children, so he does not worry about what happens after he is gone in that way. His focus is not on being remembered correctly. It's on doing the thing well while he's still doing it, playing the show like there's no tomorrow, making the music matter in the present. Keeping The Cure true to itself, whatever that means at the time. And maybe that is the real legacy, whether Smith cares about the word or not. The Cure became successful without becoming ordinary. They were strange enough to be misunderstood, melodic enough to be loved, dark enough to be claimed by Goth, and restless enough to reject the label. They were outsiders who somehow became institutions. They did not neatly fit into goth, pop, post-punk, alternative, or classic rock. They fit into something much harder to copy, which is The Cure. And that may be why Robert Smith never needed to chase any legacy, because he was just too busy making one by accident.